So we've just started the Hebrew year, Tafshin Pei base. So that is 5,782 since the creation of the world, creation of Adam Harishon, according to the Torah. And I've taken on a achlota bli neder. That means I've taken on a resolution, God willing, to the best of my ability, that I'm going to be recording these videos and posting them online, sharing the light, spreading the light. So I'm learning a book called Kitzur Likutei Moharan. So you can see the book over here. The author is Rabbi Nachman, and actually his student Rabbi Nosson wrote this book, but it all comes from Rabbi Nachman. And this Torah is a very light Torah. It's very much to the point. It's very brief. It's very Hasidic, for those of you who know what that means. If you don't know what that means, or you think you know what that means, but not really, it should become clear in future videos. But the idea is that this Torah is meant to bring about tremendous revelations of godliness in our minds and give us clarity. So we're starting off with the first lesson over here. Now the first lesson actually starts off with Ashrei Temimei Darech, which literally means fortunate are they who goes with simplicity. So the first lesson obviously is telling us something very deep about the book and what this book is about. Why are we starting off this lesson with simplicity? If you can think of any lesson to start off your book with, you could think, I don't know, I can't think of hand, but maybe think about the oneness of God, the greatness of God, the greatness of the Torah. There's many other ideas you could start off with. But we start off with this idea of simplicity. And it's actually quite a long chapter. And the chapter discusses the idea of learning Torah. And the idea of learning Torah brings down the divine intellect into our minds and therefore into our hearts and into our bodies. But it's much deeper than that, because he goes on to say that we have our own minds. We have our natural minds, the minds that we are born with. The minds that we are born with has its own way of thinking, and many times every time it's limited, but many times it's very much actually divergent to the way of the Torah. So we need to apply the character trait of simplicity in order to tune in with the Torah, with the divinity of the Torah, and let the divinity of the Torah seep into our minds. And therefore it will actually reshape our mind. Our mind really is a big muscle. And it gives us clarity with the divinity, the way we think, and therefore the way we act and the way we behave in this world. And I just want to end off on one particular idea in this chapter. I've just mentioned this idea of simplicity, that using simplicity, we are able to bring down the divine light into our mind. So if that's what's needed, is the character trait of simplicity, the question is, why is that character trait needed? Surely we could say what is needed is genius. What is needed is toil of the mind. It's not what he says. He says simplicity. Why? Because the human mind naturally tends away from divinity. That's the reason. And the human mind really is cunning, and we have something called the evil inclination. We'll discuss it much more at length at a later stage. But just very briefly, the evil inclination wants to take man away from the path of divinity. There's many questions you probably have, but let's just put that on hold for now. But the point is, the evil inclination is very clever and very cunning. So if we would say that it requires a genius to get divinity, it's not the case, because the evil inclination is a genius itself. It's very cunning. So the only way we can truly tap in to this divinity and able to push aside our evil inclination is through the character trait of simplicity. So that's just a little idea I want to share with you, and just to really take this message home. Simplicity is also humility. Is that not to think I know it all, not to realize I know it all, and even further, we learn something, we learn a text, we listen to a person speaking. Do we think we know what they're saying? Do we think we understand what they're saying? There's a certain lack of humility involved. We need to really take ourselves out of the equation, push our egos aside completely, and pretend we know absolutely nothing, And then we are in a state of simplicity to actually hear and absorb what is being told to us. And that's really the key message of this chapter, at the very least, one of the key messages of this chapter is to utilize this trait of simplicity in our divine service, particularly in learning the Torah, in learning God's wisdom, and then it will internalize in us, it will come into our mind, into our heart, and into our body, and permeate ourselves and our surroundings.